It's my privilege to introduce a woman that really doesn't need introducing. This is Dr. Susan Clubb, who is not only an internationally known avians and exotic veterinarian, but the owner of the Rainforest Clinic for Birds and Exotic and Hurricane Aviaries, where Dr. Clubb has worked very hard to establish a genetically stable collection of blue-headed macaws, very rare. And Dr. Clubb also works with color mutations on Quaker parrots, which she's created sex-linked albinos and lutinos. See? And I think that's pretty exciting. Dr. Clubb has also studied ABV extensively, feather-damaging behavior, and what she's sharing with us today, which is a parrot relinquishment survey that she did with KT. And without further ado, I'll give you the floor, Dr. Clubb.
Thank you. Well, I want to present to you today about the Parrot Relinquishment study that we did this last year with the sponsored by the KT Avian Foundation. And the reason we wanted to do this study was because the KT Avian Foundation established as one of their goals trying to improve the satisfaction of the pet bird ownership experience. And so in order to do that, what we wanted to do is to try to find out what is it that makes that experience beneficial or to people, enjoyable to people, and when that relationship breaks down and the person decides that they want to relinquish their bird, what are the reasons that they want to relinquish the bird, and then what can we do to try to improve that relationship so that people don't take the step of relinquishing their birds. And there is a tremendous amount of data in this presentation. I don't know if I'll be able to get through all of it. I'm going to really try to skim over a lot of it. But you can go to the KT website, to the Avian Foundation section on the website, and you can find all the data, all the charts, everything in the summary of the information there if you want more information. So this is little Albert. He's a bird, actually, that was just relinquished to my clinic. We do take in birds, and he was relinquished because of the death of his owner. So we know that there's definitely a lot of reasons that birds are relinquished that we can't do anything about. But we wanted to try to pinpoint the things that we could do something about and try to come up with a plan for trying to keep as many of these birds in homes as possible. So the human fascination with parrots is not a new thing. It dates back to the time of Alexander the Great. But for centuries, parrots and exotic birds were primarily owned by the wealthy collectors. And it was not until relatively recently that parrot ownership became somewhat mainstream. Large-scale importation in the 1970s to 1992 is when really parrots became extremely popular in the United States and were very much available to people. After the Wild Bird Conservation Act of 1992, Aviculture filled the demand for pet birds, companion parrots, that was previously filled by importation. But it was around that time that we started to see that the upwardly mobile society that we live in came into conflict with the long lifespan of parrots. So we started to see displacement of parrots becoming a common situation. Sanctuaries and rescues were organized, but there was always a lot of controversy about how big of a problem was that. And if you talk to some of the sanctuaries and rescue organizations, you would think that there's millions and millions and millions of birds that are being relinquished in the United States every year. And what we wanted to do is to try to get a handle on this. You know, how big is the problem? Where is the problem? What species are problematic, and why are these problems occurring? So we tried to find a tool to get some answers to this question. So again, the goal of the KT Avian Foundation was to increase the satisfaction of pet bird ownership. And again, we were trying to address these issues and correct as many of them as possible, understanding that obviously some of these issues, human life issues, certainly we couldn't address. And we modeled this after a study that was done in 2004 called the National Parrot Relinquishment Study. And this was compiled by Dr. Cheryl Meehan. She was at University of California at the time. And it was funded by the Gabriel Foundation and PetSmart's charities. And so we looked back at that study, and we wanted to pretty much reproduce all the questions so that we could compare and come up with trends that may be developing in relinquishment. So we took those original questions. Actually, it was really hard to come up with the original questions because that database had been lost. And so I sat down with Julie Murad, and we tried to recreate all the questions and then added new questions to deal with some other issues that we felt may be of importance. So our survey was an online survey. We utilized SurveyMonkey. The dates were June 20th to August 30th of 2010. And what we did is we sent out invitations to all kinds of bird lists that we could find, every bird list we could think of. We sent out invitations. We asked everybody, please cross-post this, because we wanted to reach as many people as we could possibly reach, targeting all the different stakeholders, the breeders, the pet owners, the rescue and sanctuary groups, veterinarians, zoos, wildlife centers. And to incentivize it, KT sponsored a sweepstakes, and we had 20 winners drawn that received $1,500 worth of whatever KT products they wanted. So there was a little prize, a little incentive for participation. So we hoped that would get more and more people taking part in it. So we're going to go right into the questions now, and the first question was, how would you describe your organization? And we were surprised that the largest group answering were individuals, and this is actually pretty close to what was found in the NPRRP report as well. And actually, it was a low number of welfare organizations, sanctuaries, rescues that responded. I don't know if that's because some of those groups actually may have boycotted the survey because maybe they didn't want to have their information out there, or if they didn't approve of what was happening with the survey. But again, the overall, the highest group of people that responded were individuals. And what was their role in relinquishment? The largest group, again, was rehoming and adoption. We had them all over the place, but what we were finding as the data came about was that there were a lot of people involved in relinquishment, taking in these birds, and rehoming and adoption all over the country, and not even an organized type thing, but just a lot of individuals that were doing their own little thing and trying to move these birds from one place to another and transition them into a new home. Again, many of the people, we had a question about if the people actually took the birds in or referred them on to other groups, and you can see here that again, that most of the people were actually referring them on to groups that would be rehoming and adopting. A lesser percent going into sanctuaries, permanent sanctuaries, or temporary sanctuaries. A number of them were going into breeders, and certainly that is an area in which a lot of these birds end up moving if they don't work out in a pet-type situation. The respondents' location was pretty typical of where we see the concentrations of birds, with the largest numbers being Florida, California, and Texas. Not surprising at all. We did get a lot of an international response to our survey as well, though. And interestingly, we got quite a few respondents from Australia. How many inquiries? You hear people say they get hundreds of inquiries all the time. They get these huge numbers of inquiries. But the overwhelming number of respondents got a low level of inquiries. Again, I don't know if a lot of the big organizations just didn't respond, didn't participate. The ones that are saying that they're getting huge numbers of inquiries all the time. But again, what we saw was a lot of individuals that had really a low level of inquiries and were moving these birds on into rehoming situations. How many birds did you take in the last 12 months? Again, very low responses of large groups taking in lots of birds. And most of them, again, 1 to 6 birds per year is what the majority of the respondents were taking in. So that's falls right into the trends of what we had seen before. And again, how many relinquished parrots were accepted in the last month? And these are by species. And not surprisingly, because of the demographics of the bird population, the largest group was cockatiels. There are some other species which we had, like the African greys here, 9%, cockatoos, 9.7%, macaws, 9.8%. But again, cockatiels were the species most often involved in relinquishments. Number of parrots in your care. Again, cockatiels right up there. And, macaws were pretty high in this one. And I think maybe that's because a lot of macaws may be more difficult to rehome because of spatial requirements and noise issues and things like that. So they may be a little overrepresented in birds that stay longer in the care of foster. We had a lot of data on the reason that birds are relinquished, and it was just such a huge amount of data because we had a lot of different choices that we ended up dividing it into different categories because, again, we were trying to look at what are the problems that we can't do anything about, what are the problems we can do something about. And so these are relinquishment because of changes in family situation or structure. And interestingly, over and over again, one of the things we found is that people gave them up because they felt they didn't have enough time. And certainly in our society where people are leaving at 6 o'clock in the morning and coming back at 9 o'clock at night, that certainly may be a valid reason, and that is the overwhelmingly largest reason for relinquishment. However, I have some other thoughts on that I'm going to express later on. But again, you can go and you can see all of this data, and it's kind of small here because the chart was huge, but here's all the different types of birds, and they're color-coded to the reasons for the different types of birds being relinquished. Also on the website, we have charts on each different group of birds, like a chart on cockatiels, a chart on cockatoos, macaws, why those different groups were relinquished. So you can look at all of that information in much more detail on the website. And then we have relinquishment because of failure of the human-animal bond. And these are things that I think that we can work toward correcting with training primarily, with enrichment, with working with the owners to try to teach them how to work with the bird and learn how to deal with some of these problems like destruction of property and messiness, working with people so that they learn reasonable expectations from a parrot, or maybe altering their caging or their cleaning schedules or things that they can do to try to overcome some of these things. Boredom, tired of caring for the bird, can be dealt with by interacting more, training, making the bird more interesting, which then would make the person more interested in the bird. And even down with noisiness, biting, and aggression. A lot of these things can be at least somewhat ameliorated with training and enrichment. This was, have you been involved in direct transition of birds from a relinquisher to a new home without taking possession of the birds? And interestingly, there is a network of people that are go-betweens and actually, I guess you could say they're matchmakers, matching an individual with a bird that may be in foster care in a sanctuary or rescue organization without ever taking possession of the bird. And so again, the largest percentage was small individuals and small numbers of birds. This was how many relinquished parrots have left your care in the past 12 months. And again, the numbers, as before, were mostly small numbers. I think these larger groups, I don't know if they just didn't respond or if they just hold on to the birds and don't have active adoption or rehoming policies. This is kind of hard to summarize, but basically it's of how many of the birds that you have in your care are immediately available for adoption. In permanent care, not available for adoption was the largest group in this one. And I'm not sure if this was because of birds that had behavioral problems, health issues, things like that, that a large number of these birds were in permanent care. But there were quite a few that were immediately available for placement or expected to become available for placement. So I think there are a good number of birds out there that are available to be placed once the match can be made between the potential home and the bird that's in the sanctuary rescue operation or foster. The gender was interesting, pretty much evenly split between male and females, with, of course, a number of unknown, but that was interesting that there's not a degree, a slant of gender bias or gender representation. Length of time that parrots are in your care. This chart is really confusing. I even had trouble with it myself. How do we deal with this? So we'll go on past that, and you can go to it in the study and look at it and say, what can I glean from this particular chart? Known medical conditions. It was interesting when we looked at this that most of the birds didn't have known medical conditions. That there weren't a lot of birds in the study that were being relinquished because of a medical condition. But of the ones that, beak abnormalities come up here, birds being underweight, birds being obese, were most heavily represented. We didn't see a lot of feather problems, in this particular data set. But there were a number of, neurological diseases, visual problems, just a mishmash of things there. But the largest percentage of them had no known medical conditions. Species that are available for adoption. Again, these data are pretty similar to the ones that we saw before. Cockatiels, macaws, Amazons, cockatoos being most highly represented. Okay, and this is of the parrots in your care. How many are in permanent care, not available for placement? And this was a really high percentage. I was puzzled by this 53% of the respondents feeling that these birds were not available for placement for some reason. 30% here immediately available for placement, 17% expected to be in placement within the next 6 months. Of the birds available for placement, the largest response is that most of the responders felt that these birds were most suitable for placement in private homes. Here you got 15% that they felt they were most useful for breeders, and these in long-term flocks or retirement sanctuary situation. How did you obtain the parrots currently in your care? The largest percentage here were surrendered by individuals or single families. See, this is by single individual and families. And so most of these birds that are going into relinquishment were birds from pet homes. These would be birds that were confiscated, birds that were abandoned, birds that were purchased. I always like this one. You purchase a bird to rescue it. But there's that 10% that were purchased in order to be rescued. But again, the overwhelming number of them were given up by individuals or families. This is the undesirable behaviors chart. And this one was also like really hard to get into something that you could really see. But interestingly, in most of the species, most of them were not being relinquished because of behavioral problems. The blue down here is birds that did not seem to be relinquished for a behavioral problem. And then you can see, and again, you'll be able to see this better if you go to the website and actually look at the chart, but this is exhibiting no undesirable behaviors, and that's the blue bar at the bottom. So for most of the species, that was the largest thing. Feather destruction in the dark red here. You can see there's cockatiels, budgies, Australian parakeets, so all the different groups are represented, and you can go and see the reasons, behavioral reasons for our desires, excuse me, the behaviors that are exhibited by the birds once they were relinquished. And here again is most of them exhibited no undesirable behaviors, or that was the largest group. Aggression to people was the second largest behavioral problem that was seen in the parrots that relinquished. Here's aggression toward other parrots. Incessant screaming, and we define that as continuous and uninterrupted screaming for 15 minutes or more. And then some of the lesser behaviors, fearfulness, feather destruction, repetitive behaviors, and self-mutilation. Again, this is color-coded, and you can go to the website and see the expansion of the chart. So if there's a group that you're specifically interested in, there's a lot of data there that you can glean from this. Ownership history, the overwhelming number here, 33%, were birds that only had one previous home. And we always hear that these birds are bouncing from one home to another. But that didn't seem to be revealed in this data. The number of birds with 5 or more previous homes, 7%. So I think most of the birds, have a problem in one home, maybe 2. We had here 23% with 2 previous homes. But the data doesn't indicate that there's tremendous numbers of birds that are bouncing from one home to another. Euthanasia was another question that we asked, and it was originally in the NPRP study addressed as a question to veterinarians, but basically in this study everybody answered this question, and it didn't seem that there were a lot of people that were being asked to euthanize birds. And here you got 76% that in the last 12 months had not been asked to euthanize a bird just because they couldn't find a home. So I don't think that that's a big issue, that there's large-scale euthanasia of healthy birds just because they don't have a home, or at least it was not indicated in this study. And again, this was how many birds have you euthanized in the last 12 months because they didn't have a home. And again, 94% no euthanasia. So I don't think that that's a major problem, at least with the people who responded to the survey. And would you euthanize a bird that had a serious medical condition? A lot of the people, most of the people, 50% said yes, they would euthanize if there was a medical condition rather than trying to maintain these birds or rehome these birds with serious medical conditions. Would you euthanize a parrot if you have no resources or space to care for it? And 90%, it was a pretty resounding no on this question, which was a good thing to see. Would you euthanize a parrot that was not adoptable? And again, the percentage was pretty high that there's not large-scale euthanasia of birds just because they're simply not adoptable. How do you keep records? Pretty low percentage had no records at all. We had quite a few that had only paper records. Many of them kept health and medical records. That was 33%. So I was pretty surprised that many people really maintained health and medical records, not only just source and disposition records, but actually behavioral and health records. And 27% had computerized records. So I think that's a progressive trend. We asked about fees that are associated with relinquishment and adoption. And I was surprised that 47% had no fees associated with relinquishment or adoption. And to me, that I don't know if that really is a good way to go, because I feel that for people to take in a bird, to adopt a bird, if they just get the bird for free, I don't think it has as much of a value to them. So certainly many of these groups that are underfunded and getting by on a shoestring certainly, I think, could benefit from charging relinquishment fees, adoption fees, to at least cover their cost. And the fee that was most commonly reported was an adoption fee, with 22% charging an adoption fee. And you can see there's a number of different types of fees that people do charge in their own individual programs. But again, I think this reflects, again, the individuals that are taking in low numbers of birds, moving low numbers of birds, rehoming them, and doing them because they want to do it. They love the birds. They're not doing it because they want a monetary return, or even that they even want their costs covered. But there's just this, I think, this wonderful network of individuals and small organizations all over the country that are doing this really for the love of the birds. Organizational structure. Your largest group here, 48%, private homes. So again, small individual family organizations. Some of them here had no structure. I can believe that. Bird clubs here, 6%. Foster home networks here for 8%, and then 23% were the larger 501c3 organizations. So we asked here, of the organizations, how many of them were 501c3 or tax-exempt organizations, and we got 26% of them. So even though there are a lot of small organizations, then maybe many of these are trying to really organize in more practical and economic and business-like structure. Whereas 73%, again, that's probably most of those individuals, private homes, small groups that don't have any tax structure to their organization. Where do you house the relinquished birds? 45% in private homes. So that was, again, pretty much consistent with the other data. 18% here in foster homes, and then these smaller groups in retail stores, breeding facilities, warehouses, things like that. Affiliations, the largest group, bird club affiliations. So again, I think that's your individuals, your home, your small networks that are working within this. Avicultural associations, many of this I think would be groups like AFA, AAV, ASA, as well as smaller state and local avicultural associations. How do you house the relinquished birds? Again, the overall majority, individual cages with a lesser degree in flights, individual cages with accesses to flights or cage-free housing. So most of the birds are housed, much as individual pet people house their birds in their homes. What enrichment do you provide? Again, it's all over the map with the enrichment, whether it be commercial toys, other companion birds, foraging, branches, flight opportunities. So there's a lot of different ways that people that are taking in these relinquished birds are providing enrichment for them. What's the substrate? Again, here's your biggest one, newspaper. So you just envision this family that's taking in birds, keeping them in a parrot cage in their home, just keeping them just like they normally would keep any parrot, and looking for a home for them. And that was the majority of our responses. This was on criteria for accepting birds. There are rescues, certainly, which are species-specific, which is here, the 19%. And then they're all over the place. Some that take in disabled birds. This was 7.8% that take in disabled birds. This 19% take in birds only locally. This 20% take in local and state, and then this smaller group here that will take in birds from anywhere nationwide. What determines how many birds you allow into your facility at one time? And then space availability was the main limitation that was presented here, and 82%. So a lot of people are taking in as many birds as they can accommodate realistically. Don't know where the other ones go to if they go on to larger rescue or sanctuary groups. Staffing, the majority, again, were owner-operators, small operations or family operations. And then this 25% were groups that had volunteer staff. Pretty low percentage of them, 13%, had any paid staff to care for the birds. And the number of staff, again, small, 1 to 3 is the vast majority. Very few groups with large number of staff. Adoption policies and criteria. Your biggest group here had an application process, and many of them had site visits. And then there's all kinds of other criteria that they would have, that they'll adopt to the elderly, adopt to children, adopt locally only. So a number of them had various adoption criteria, but it's actually a pretty small percentage here that had an application process. Post-adoption follow-up. And so we looked at phone follow-up, which is the largest group, written follow-up, email. A low percentage had no follow-up at all. That was only 3% that didn't go back and follow up to see what happened with the birds post-adoption. Funding. Again, this keeps coming back to the same theme. Self or family funded, small groups. Some solicited private donations. Very few got grants or state or federal funding or bequests or endowments. So again, back to your small family or individual groups doing the majority of what we were seeing in this study as far as rehoming. How many birds in your care came up from a source other than private homes? There were a number of them that came from other sanctuaries or rescues, and so I feel that maybe these represented groups that were species specific, and that I only take in cockatiels, and so if I get offered macaws, I send them to this one, and that sort of thing. Many would send them on to breeders if they felt that was the best place for the birds to go, and certainly that is the best place for many of these birds. Zoo exhibit was a larger group than I had anticipated. And then some of these birds go on into pet stores or other retail situations where they would be sold. This was about working with veterinarians. How many of the rescuers work with veterinarians? And we got a low percentage of responses here. But this was 27% do work with veterinarians, 12% don't work with veterinarians. I don't know what the other percentage do. Who knows? I guess they're somewhere in between. Maybe they are a vet. I don't think that many, because that would be quite a large percentage. Medical protocol. I was surprised about this, that a larger percentage don't have any medical protocol. You would think that many of these groups would have some health screening of birds coming into their facilities. But again, if it's individuals, they're probably saying, well, I know this person, I've known this person's bird, it looks healthy. Of course, we know that you can't look at them and tell. But I was kind of disappointed with the percentage that actually use veterinarians and have medical protocols. Likewise, not a lot of them have quarantine facilities for new arrivals either. So I think this is certainly, anyone who's working with rescue sanctuary groups, this is definitely an area that probably needs improvement. Do you have necropsies or pathology performed on birds that die in the facility? And the largest response was no. So this is I could see this as a potential way that diseases could be disseminated if these groups are not at least doing some health evaluation on birds that they take in before they rehome them. This was about return of adopted birds. And again, the overwhelming response was that, yes, if I put a bird out there and it doesn't do well in the place where I place this bird, that we will take them back and try again. So again, that was 41% said yes, 5% said no. And do they repeat the quarantine? Well, I kind of wonder about that since so many of them didn't do any quarantine in the first place. But yeah, you can see the responses here. And do you refund adoption fees? And I agree with this. The resounding response was no. So conclusions. Well, I guess you could look at all the data and come up with all kinds of conclusions. But I think the overwhelming one was that first, the total numbers, we can't have a real clear view of what's going on just from an email or electronic survey, because your participants are self-selected. So you don't know how many people are out there who didn't respond for one reason or another, whether they felt that there was some ulterior motive, or we were going to do something with the data that they didn't approve of, or they just didn't take the time or effort to respond. So again, we don't know how this really reflects on the total numbers of birds that are actually out there being relinquished and rehomed. But what we found was it was predominantly relinquished by families to individuals or small organizations, not so much the large organizations. And when we compared this data back to the data from 2004, it looked as if the number of parrots being relinquished are declining. And again, you know, you're basing it on a survey. We don't have any more precise way of measuring this, but it does not appear from this study that the problem is a continuing and growing study as much as you would hear in the popular media. Reasons for relinquishment. The most common one was not enough time. And again, I feel that much of that is an erosion of the bond, a breakdown of the bond, because primarily because the bird probably is not trained to interact appropriately with their owners. And I think that this is definitely a place that we can interject and we can improve the lot, as well as with biting, aggression, noisiness. Best interest of the bird, I think this also gets back to the not enough time and perhaps not an enriching relationship for both of them, both the bird and the person. But then you get into these things like moving and having a baby, illness in the family. These types of things we can't control, we can't do anything about. These birds are going to be displaced or relinquished regardless of what we might be able to try to do. So we tried to take these reasons and put them into major reasons for relinquishment, dividing them into behavioral reasons, health and personal reasons, which these are the things we can't change, moving, having a baby. They can't care for it anymore. You know, they're physically unable to, allergies, retirement, marriage, divorce, and death. And then compatibility issues. And these are the issues that I think, compatibility and behavioral, that we might be able to make a change in these types of problems. And so we went and we looked at the comparison of the NPRRP data from 2004 and then our study. And these numbers are hard to interpret because they don't add up to 100. They had multiple answers. But you can still see that it's pretty similar here. Compatibility issues seem to be the overwhelming reason. Health and personal, again, these we can't change, and behavioral. So this is what we want to focus on with the behavioral and the compatibility in order to reduce the relinquishment rate in the U.S. So again, way too much data to present here. Please go to the website. You can study it. You can look at all the charts and see it in much more detail. If there's species you're particularly interested in, cockatoos, macaws, Amazons, cockatiels, whatever, the data's there. You can go through it, you can study it, and interpret it as you wish. And I just wanted to acknowledge the KT Avian Foundation and KT for sponsoring and funding this study. And our friends at the KT Learning Center, Michelle Goodman, John Salm, please thank them when you go to the KT booth for helping with this. And also one of their wonderful employees who prepared all the graphs and charts, and I didn't have to do that, which I loved. That was a lot of work. And Julie Murad for helping with correlating the questions so that we could make some sort of a comparison between the 2004 and the 2010 data. And thank you very much. If you have any questions, I will be happy to try to address them. Yes?
Questions? Jenny?
Two questions. From the data, were you able to determine roughly how many parrots are in sanctuary or foster permanent care in living spotted? And number two, by year, were you able to break it down?
That was really a tough question, and we do have some numbers in the survey, and you can see that online. But the way we asked the questions, we asked number ranges, and that if we had, when we do it again, I hope we're going to do it again in a few more years, we will ask for more precise numbers, because when you get into a number range, whether it's 75 to 100 or 100 to 200, then it's hard to crunch the data and come up with numbers. Does that answer your question? Yeah, that is a design flaw of the study, that we didn't ask for more precise data. We asked for ranges.
Yeah, I got a question regarding does Kate, the reason for this was to see if Kate, if you could come up with ways to improve the human-bird bond. Is
Exactly.
KT going to have any actions planned for doing something like that?
Well, we've already started, and what we've started is, and our first effort is an educational program for the new bird owner. And we developed a video called Bringing Birdie Home, and it basically tells the new bird owner, you're going to have this problem and this problem and this problem and this problem, and this is how you can deal with these problems. So that we want people to have a realistic expectation, so that they don't bring the bird home and then say, oh my gosh, he's been here for 2 weeks and he's not talking. Or he's throwing seeds around on the floor, or he's acting like a bird. So yeah, that's the first step that we've taken, and we're encouraging training and interaction. We're working with Barbara Heidenreich on trying to develop, and we're looking for the next step. So definitely open to discussion on that. Yes.
Earlier today, we were talking about how we can network together to rehome birds, and I'm just wondering, do we have anything in place like that? Because I do have a pet store, and I am always looking to help rehome birds. So, is there any kind of a network in place for this group of people?
You have rehoming organizations that belong to the country,
Right.
and you have people who do it. I guess you have to take a look at the membership.
Well, yeah, that's another thing that we were trying to think, like, how can we do that? And yeah, we definitely need to work on that. We definitely work on some sort of way to bring people under a network. I don't know how to do that.
We actually were looking at that in the welfare committee at AAV, and I know there were people actually assigned to looking into that to try to get a network that we could let people know that, call these people to help, find the appropriate homes for them. But I'm not sure where that's at with the welfare committee. There hasn't been a lot of communication recently. But I'll let you know after.
Yeah, that's
AAV.
definitely a need. And I think that some umbrella group would have to be involved. But then whenever you have these umbrella groups, there's always this group that, well, I don't like them and I don't like them.
And I think
And
on Avian, there were a lot of individuals in this committee on AAV that I think might have caused it to become a standstill. So we probably need to work on that. But AAV would be a good place to start that.
Well, a quick comment on that. A lot of the specialty organizations have that kind of in place already. I know Sandy Melenda did with the Parrot Society, so that might be a place to start to contact specialty clubs. I don't know.
Well, a lot of the people that were interested in NAV were some of the sanctuary members,
Mhm.
and like I said, I
And if this survey is a true reflection of what's happening out there, there's just lots of little people in little groups, and I don't know how you would construct something to be able to communicate with all of these people.
One of the things that we do as a rehoming group is one of the things we ask at the very outset before an intake. We'll say to people, is there any behavioral issue that if we solved it, you would be willing to keep your bird? And I think that needs to be the first question, because in many instances, people feel isolated with their problem when in fact it's an old problem. And you can really help them if it's not like something like a death or something that the family doesn't want the bird or whatever. Many birds, and since we have founded our organization, we've probably kept 60 birds in homes that would normally have gone into rehoming. And that always feels really very good, So I think that we need to identify people who will work with people toward solving behavioral issues. And some of them are very simply solved.
And so much of it is education. But the problem, one of the other issues that we were trying to address was, how do you reach those people before they relinquish the parrot? And like you were saying, work with them to try to solve the problem. And many of these problems may be relatively easy to solve if you can just reach them before they give them up, before they've made that irrevocable decision that they're not going to keep the bird. And so broad-scale education, I think, is a big part of this. And I think our avian behaviorists are out there are doing a great job of reaching the people that want to be reached. But how do you reach the ones that we don't know about? Yes. Exactly, and that's why our beginning focus was educating the new bird owner. If you can reach the new bird owner, that's probably the easiest group to reach initially. And so we developed the Bringing Birdie Home program, and we have the video on YouTube. And if you go by the KT booth, you can get the little stickers that have the link to or if you just go to YouTube and search for Bringing Birdie Home, you'll find it. And so we're trying to develop this program where you get written material and video material out there to people before they make that mistake. So if anybody has a great idea on how you can reach the broader populations, am I? No. KT sponsored the video, and Barbara Heidenreich and I and Michelle Goodman, we went out and we had a nice time in Austin, Texas, doing the little video, and we have it's on YouTube. So, yeah. Well, we're still trying to decide what to do about that. Well, anybody who wants this, it's there. It's there for everybody. So, it's easily accessible. Yes.
In the question of where do you look when you have to refer someone, or if a bird is brought into a pet store, that type of thing. Even the humane societies, many places will seek out the individual clubs in each state. Our clubs has had an adoption program. We're a fairly new club in the last 5 years, and we've rehomed about 68 birds or so in the last 3 years. We also, the first thing we do too is to see in evaluating the whole process and looking at the application, and certainly many lengthy phone calls, is evaluating if it's possible to work with these people to keep their bird. And there are a lot of occasions where that is the case. The other thing that we find helpful is all the educational programs going out into the schools, and especially the VOAG schools, and doing education. But I'm seeing more and more pet stores, and I know in Connecticut we have some very good programs that the individual pet stores are providing now, where they have speakers or they have classes. There's one in Massachusetts now that does routine classes that the purchaser of a new baby has to come to, in learning how to work with their bird, how to train their bird, how to avoid problems. But I think the local clubs in every state are the ones you can look to, and I think those are the ones we also count on. I think the only thing you have to be careful of is there are some clubs that do adoption without doing any home visits, and I think that's pretty frightening. So you want to be sure that if you are placing a bird, you know, that there are home visits done and that there is a screening process. Also, the website. We use our website very frequently. It goes in our newsletter with a picture and a long write-up in detail, the good and the bad, if there's behavior problems or whatever, or challenges. I think you have to be very specific to what the challenge is going to be so that people aren't misguided at all and then looking to return the bird.
Yeah, I think as we as an industry work toward really educating people so that they understand what they're getting into and they don't have surprises, and they know that they have resources to go to if they have a problem. I mean, that's a big part of it. So,
would everyone join me in thanking Dr. Clubb for her time this afternoon?